The overall state of college football is in shambles. We are going to tell you why and how. I am Joey Lavelle. This is Briggs McLemore and Dylan Chambers, and we are the Nothing But Sports podcast. Thank you for tuning in. Please like and subscribe. Let us know your thoughts on the overall state of college football. We will also cover some of the coaching changes in the NFL, and it is championship weekend in the NFL leading up to the Super Bowl in a couple of weeks. So we will have analysis on that. And our question of the day, which kind of leads into the state of college football. If you had one change you could make, what is the most urgent change you would make in college football if you were commissioner? So please let us know your thoughts, comment, like, subscribe. We thank you so much for tuning in. We thank you for the support. So leading in, we'll start with the on-the-field product in college football. It has never been better. There's more parity than ever. You've had a lot more closer games. With the expansion of the playoffs, more games mean more at the end of the season. You kind of saw that with Texas playing Texas A&M. Even though they already had 3 losses, they were still really fighting. Granted, it's a rivalry game, but we'll ignore that part for now. So, with the on-the-field product being never better, how can the sport be in such shambles? Well, leads into the first part of the sport being in shambles, the high school recruiting. It kind of leads into the transfer portal. High school recruiting's just absolutely been destroyed by the transfer portal. Coaches don't want to take the chance on unproven talent. It's the same argument in the NFL when you're arguing versus a free agent versus a draft pick. It's unproven talent. You don't know how they're going to react. So if you can fill those slots in free agency, why would you fill those slots in high school? So schools want the plug and play. I think it's really hurt kid development in college. You see that with a lot of quarterbacks and offensive linemen. Offensive line play has been down across college football and in the NFL recently. And when you do have that 5-star that does get recruited by the big school, or even that 4-star, it completely resets the NIL market. So, and I'll give this example and then I'll bring Briggs in. When player A comes out of high school, and say player A comes out of high school in 2023, and his NIL deal is $500,000 a year. We'll just use that as an example. And then we go to 2024. We'll say the market now, what last year was $500,000 for a high school wide receiver. Well, now new 5-star player B gets a $700,000 deal coming out of high school. So player A thinks that he's better and can get more money. And so he goes and enters the transfer portal because he's told he will have a better deal. Even though he didn't play at whatever school, he thinks he can go earn more money because he thinks he's better than player B, who just got a $700,000 deal, versus the new high school kid, or the kid that came in 2023 getting $500,000. He thinks he's worth $800,000 because he thinks he's better than high school recruit player B. So every year the market gets reset and it really becomes a problem for these players. And just high school kids are losing so many opportunities, especially at the big name schools: Alabama, Ohio State, Georgia, Texas, A&M, Oklahoma, the Wolverine, the Michigan, whatever school. They're losing a bunch of opportunities. So I will bring in Briggs. What are your thoughts on the overall state of high school recruiting without dipping too much into the transfer portal? But what do you think are the biggest problems with high school recruiting right now, and why that affects the state of college football?
I think Nick Saban encapsulated it best when he would talk about it. Is a lot of those guys earlier on when the transfer portal wasn't as big, they would go to these top programs, say Alabama, Ohio State, and they would go there to get developed into a better player. Nowadays, the big problem you're seeing is kids from high school are coming in to some of these top programs and wanting to play immediately. And so you see that, and they're going up, they're fresh out of high school going up against guys who are 24 and have significantly more experience than them. And they're simply just not going to get a spot on the 11-man roster on the field. And they might work. I mean, you saw Dylan Stewart 2 years ago for South Carolina. He pretty much worked his way into that starting defensive rotation, but he's just a freak athlete. You don't come across those every single year in the recruiting cycle. And so for that normal 3 or 4 star who's going to some of these top programs, they're not going to play instantly, and they don't necessarily want to take the time to develop. And as they say, all good things come with time. And so when they go and they transfer out, you start to see guys like what's his name, TJ Finley, the quarterback who's been to 7 football programs, which is unbelievable. Not only that he's been around as long as he has, but the fact that he's just bounced around from place to place with absolutely no consistency. You're not going to be able to make it to the next level doing that. And at the same time, the whole reason you're in college is to get a degree, is to earn an education, because a lot of these guys aren't going to make it to the next level. They're not going to be able to go play pro. There's only so many spots in the NFL. And that level of talent is even better than what they're competing with at these schools that they're trying to start at. And so I think that a lot of these young kids bouncing around all over the place is not only bad for football itself, but it's bad for their education and kind of like the rest of, I don't want to say the rest of their life, but being able to progress academically.
Done?
Yeah, I agree completely. I mean, I think it's important for athletes to get like that early exposure, because a lot of what we're seeing with college football now with the NIL, or excuse me, with transferring and everything, is rosters like Ohio State, Michigan, these big teams can go and get players that already have developed and bring them in, and they'll turn over like 30% of their roster year in and year out, and that's what we're seeing a lot of. And I think that, I mean, honestly, to me, it's crazy that high school players, it's almost like they're being undervalued or devalued compared to what they used to be, because now it's not as important. Like, coaches don't worry about high school recruiting as much if they understand that they're getting in some wide receiver that went and had 1,000 yards at a small school last year. They're steps ahead of the guy coming out of the class of 2026. So it undervalues like players that are coming out of high school, and I think it's kind of crazy to me, to be honest, because I think that there should be more like developmental pipelines for these players. Like, you should still be able to go and be a 4 or 5 star recruit and get recruited to bigger schools, but instead it's only like the upper echelon that are still even getting looked at by these schools. Joe?
And we'll kind of move into the transfer portal and the NIL problem with college football, but I think you're seeing two conflicting styles of running your program. And you really saw this in the playoff of Oregon, who's a lot of high school recruiting, versus Indiana, who's a lot of transfer portal. You have Ole Miss, who's a lot more transfer portal, a lot more roster turnover, versus Miami, who's a lot more high school recruiting base. But say for teams like Indiana, where you don't have as big of a high school recruiting base, but you have the NIL, you have a solid coach in place, and you have the booster support behind you, you are able to flip these rosters. And you just saw, this is far and away the most transfer portal based team that has won the Natty. Congrats to Indiana, by the way. If you haven't checked that video out, go ahead and check it out. Our instant reaction to the Natty was released on Monday night. But got off topic there. But it's very conflicting styles and the way you're able to turn over a roster. And now you've seen a lot of teams take the approach that kind of Indiana took, where you get the most experienced guys. I will disclose my biases. I'm a Buckeye fan. Monitored Ohio State's transfer portal situation very much closer, and they had almost 30 guys transfer out, but it was only a couple hundred snaps that transferred out. Versus now at the end of this transfer portal cycle, they have more than 1,000 career snaps played coming in. So now I think you've seen big programs start to take that approach where you're just plugging the experience. You're not even trying to build depth at this point through the transfer portal. And I think the one I will get your thoughts on this in a second. I think that the one-time window has done more damage than we thought it would. I think most people that are in the college football world thought the one transfer portal window would help. Granted, they put the window in at the wrong time. It should have been in the spring, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But I think that did more damage. So, moving more into the transfer portal, it has been an arms race for proven commodities in the transfer portal, as I just said. These players are very much desperate for playing time because they think they're better than player X, Y, and Z. So they're thinking, well, why would I just sit at Ohio State and develop when I can go to, say, TCU, who's offering a couple 100,000 more than Ohio State was, and I can start there. So I think this is another thing. No guardrails. That needs to change. No guardrails are really hurting the players specifically and the coaches. There have been 10,500 college football players that entered the transfer portal in all levels of college football. Not just D1 and FBS, but 10,500 in all levels. So that's D1, D2, D3. I think that includes JUCO and
NAIA.
Yeah. And 4,145 entered D1. That was stats as of Tuesday night. Only 2,600 of them, little more than 2,600 of them have committed to a school. That is insane. I believe that is about 62% of players that have committed to their next school. And so there have been so many players over the years that have hopped in the transfer portal. Maybe say a guy from like TCU, maybe a freshman from TCU that enters the transfer portal, and then he just disappears. He doesn't find a roster spot anymore. Or the kid that thinks he has a better opportunity from FAU who got a lot of snaps but just doesn't find a spot anymore. And so it really hurts, and you just see guys disappear, and it happens so much. And I think one of the biggest problems that we have in college football right now is agents. You don't, and Dylan, you know the NFL relatively well. There are no rules for agents. There's no accreditations. You just have to go put in your LinkedIn that you're an agent, and that's it. That's all you have to do. And so these kids, it could be like Briggs could go be my agent for college football. He has no schooling. He has no he has nothing. He has no qualifications for being an agent. And so now you have these jackals posing as agents giving these kids horrendous advice. And they think they're going to go get more playing time. They don't. They think they're going to get a bigger bag. They don't. They just disappear off the face of the earth. And we never hear these kids again. And there have been some pretty good football players that have entered. And now, with these NIL deals, you have players getting sued. You saw that with Damon Williams. He ended up going back to Washington after he got sued. Darian Mensah just got sued. This is one of the most disastrous parts of college football. I'll move to you, Briggs, on your overall opinion on the transfer portal and NIL.
So I think that when the NCAA and the powers that be opened this box, they opened Pandora's box. I think it was a mistake to do both at once. I think it should be one or the other. Now, you can make your argument on whether or not college football players should be paid. And now I think they're being overpaid to the point where it's like now we're starting to kind of see inflation in how much they're getting paid. Joe, you mentioned earlier, player A getting $500,000 out of high school, and then player B, who just came out of high school the next year, getting $700,000. I think we're seeing too much of that, and then the market's starting to get out of control. And we'll get to this later, but I think that there needs to be some sort of structure in the way that the contracts are done, to the point where we're not seeing. It's hard to prove the tampering. Like, it's there, but you can't prove it. So that we see, like, okay, Darian Mensah, he's under contract at Duke for the next 2 years, and he will make this much per year. Whether or not you want to add in incentives, whatnot, that's up to the school, that's up to their athletic program. But to have that structure in place to prevent, hey, he's not allowed to go and enter the transfer portal. If he does, he owes the school this much for a buyout. And given, if that's the case, you'll start seeing schools pay for these kids' buyouts. It's not going to be the end of the world for them. But there needs to be more structure than there is right now, because right now there is nothing at all. It's just a free-flowing market, and it's something that needs to be fixed, because if it doesn't, it's going to get out of control to the point where I don't know if we will be able to rein it back in.
I'll make one more point before I let you step in, Dylan. You mentioned student athletes earlier. Everyone forgets the student. Like, I don't really care for graduates because they're not going to school, but everyone forgets the student and how hard this is to be a student when you're in the transfer portal. Granted, your life is pretty much devoted to football when you're a D1 college football athlete, but still, it's really, you have to remember the student. And I think we're heading towards a CBA, and we're going to do a segment on our proposed CBA at some point over the off season, probably coming in the coming months, the coming weeks, more than likely. But everyone forgets the student. And I'll move to you, Dylan, on your take as well.
I mean, y'all pretty much nailed every bullet point I got. I don't want to get too into depth into what I think should be changed, because it kind of goes hand in hand with the question of the day. But like Briggs was saying, something has to change. Like, shouldn't be able to just go to a school, decide, oh, I want more money, and leave. Like, there's got to be contracts. Like, you got to add incentives to for players to stay. Like, something needs to give. And I mean, that's all I've really got. Y'all literally covered everything I've got.
So, and I'll use the NFL example again. We kind of see this with, I'll use defensive ends as an example. I forget which. I think it was Myles Garrett most recently reset the market for. So TJ Watt resets the market for defensive ends, right?
Yeah.
And then so Myles Garrett probably wants more than TJ Watt as soon as he signs his contract. But Myles Garrett can't get more on his contract until his contract is up. That is not the way it is in college football. Myles Garrett had to wait till the end of his contract, and then he reset the market when it comes to defensive ends. And now, when TJ Watt's contract expires, I know there's tons of other great defensive ends out there. It's beside the point. But now, TJ Watt, whenever his contract expires, he will have the ability to go reset the market again. But you have the market getting reset every day. And like Greg said, there's an inflation on the money. You just had Ty Simpson get offered $6.5 million. $6.5 million to play 1 year at Miami. That is insanity. And I really think a CBA is where we're heading. And I think that will be the best thing for the sport, is so that way you have this all aligned between the coaches, the players, the conference commissioners, all of the moving parts that you have to get in agreement. I think that is the way we're heading. And like I said earlier, I think the one portal window being shifted so early really hurt the cycle, because I think you've seen more wild things in the transfer portal than you really have seen before. So moving into the calendar and the coaching carousel, early signing day was December 5th. The late signing day, the normal signing day for all athletes, is February 4th. We have one transfer portal window. It's January 2nd through the 16th. That ended on Friday last week, I think, something like that. And you had the regular season end on November 29th in college football. You had conference championship weekend, I believe, on December 5th or 6th. I can't remember which one. And so now you have the Lane Kiffin conundrum, which is the most famous example. He wanted to get to LSU or make a decision on which job. He had to make a decision, more or less, by early signing day, because you want the coach to be in place. You saw that really hurt Penn State because they just lost the recruiting cycle because they didn't have a head coach in place. And so now you have the playoffs starting. I believe playoffs started December 19th this year. Regular season ended November 29th. National championship was on January 19th. In the middle of the playoffs, you have the transfer portal window. Conference championship weekend, you have early signing day. February 4th, which is not long from now. It's about 2 weeks from now. You have that coming up. So, and now you have 32 FBS coaches have new jobs because of the cycle being so early. If you can say if National Signing Day was the only signing day was February 4th, and then you have the transfer portal window in April, May, March, whenever. Probably May is probably the best bet, or June. So that way kids can be there for fall camp and you know what holes you have to fill as a coach. But the calendar is just a disaster because, again, it's not what's best for the kids, because now you have to reevaluate where you're going when coaches get fired on November 30th. And then now you have to reevaluate where you're going. Half of these schools don't have set coaches in. So it's just a disaster. You had 17 new Power 4 coaches this year. The coaching cycle was insane. And so the playoffs need to get shrunk. I think that's a thing. I don't think we should be playing the national championship on Martin Luther King Day. Next year, it's the week after Martin Luther King Day. It's on January 25th. So, Briggs, what is your thoughts on the calendar and the disaster that we have as a college football calendar?
So there's a couple different ways we can go about this. We can move the college football season up a week. And that's because it already starts after like the first full week of classes, depending on what school you go to. Everyone starts at different times, but usually it starts after the first full week of classes. And so you can't move it up 2 weeks because then no one's on campus. No one, like those stadiums are going to be half empty. Given a lot of college football teams, at least in the Power Four, are playing non-Power Four teams. They're playing FCS opponents. So if that's something you really want, I mean, you can do that, but you can move it up a week. But then at the same time, you can also probably shrink the season from 12 to 10 games and play your same 8, 9, or I guess if you're doing 9 conference games, play 11 games total. That way you get 2 out of conference games at the start of the year, then you go into your conference schedule. But with the way that the current calendar is, and everyone talks about expanding the playoff, if you want the coaches, because ideally everyone needs to be enrolled in their new school for the second semester. And that's the big issue with the current playoff the way it is you're seeing like the second round of the playoffs starting after the new year when everyone else is getting kind of settled in and getting ready to go to their new schools. Now we're seeing Alberto Mendoza just transferred to Georgia Tech. I've been at school here for a week now. This is my first full week we're about to finish. So how is he supposed to go pack all of this stuff up from Indiana and get down to Georgia Tech and actually get into classes, get enrolled and everything? I understand that he's probably known that he's going to go to Georgia Tech, speaking of the fact that he committed like the day after. So they probably had things in motion there. But we don't need this 3-week break in between the end of the regular season at Thanksgiving weekend or conference championship weekend. Go straight from conference championships, maybe get 1 week off if you want to give guys like a rest, give teams a chance to get guys back from injury. But go straight from that and go into the playoffs, go into bowls. There's no reason to wait. That way, if you have games in like home field or have home field advantage for the first round of the playoff, students actually are there. That way, when you go home, you're already into the rounds of the playoff where it's actually at set bowl locations, and then no one's missing out on anything.
Done?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, one of the biggest problems with it is like when we get into late November, early December, and the conference championship games are being played, when the college football playoff is going on, you got like you were talking about the Lane Kiffin story. There, it's just chaos when there shouldn't be chaos. There should be an allotted window for all the recruiting to be done for coaching changes. Like Lane Kiffin shouldn't have to not coach in the CFP because he's thinking long term for the future. So I mean, like Briggs nailed it pretty well. Like something's got to be moved, shifted, because the calendar is just it's a mess.
And you talk about squishing the playoffs together, Griggs, or you could just do it like the Super Bowl, where you have 2 weeks off before the national championship, or even 10 days. That would, I think, would be the simplest. So that way, in theory, if you want the national championship to be on New Year's Eve, New Year's Day, you could give them 2 weeks off so that way they can go spend Christmas with their families. That way, if they so choose, they can have Christmas, whatever, and then they move in. The only problem that you do run into is the entire Christmas break thing. But like I said, when you're a D1 college football player, your life is football. Like that's just what it is. I would love the opportunity to be a D1 athlete. I'm not, but that is a beautiful, like that is an awesome opportunity. And I don't think most of those guys are complaining about it, but I think that is one of the better ways to shift the calendar. We will put our heads together and kind of figure this out to make a proposition and just throw some ideas out there. Maybe someone will hear it. But you said there's no reason for Lane Kiffin to not be coaching Ole Miss. I think one of the storylines that kind of got overshadowed in the playoffs is how bad teams were hurt by their offensive and defensive coordinators not being 100% committed to the team that they have in the playoffs. You saw it with Ole Miss with Charlie Weiss. You saw it with Brian Hartline at Ohio State. You saw it with Tosh Lupoi and Will Stein at Oregon. You saw it with Bob Chesney. You saw it with John Summerall. Granted, those two didn't really have a chance, but nevertheless, the point still there is in moving into the CFP, I think talk of expansion is really harming the sport. You're gonna water down the regular season at some point because you kind of saw a little bit in the last, like Ohio State didn't. Obviously, Ohio State had to play for the rivalry, but Ohio State and Indiana didn't have anything to play for Week 14, other than the fact to win their rivalry games and go undefeated. I mean, yeah, they played for a Big Ten championship, but both of those teams were getting in regardless. There was never a shadow of a doubt that those teams were going to get in if they lost Week 14. So, you saw it with Texas A&M. Texas A&M didn't have anything to play for because they were already 11-0. They were getting in the playoffs regardless. Now, it harmed them because they didn't get the bye and they didn't get to play in the SEC championship, but they still got a first-round game, home game. So, when you talk about expanding to 24 teams, I think it really harms the sport. There are not 24 teams to win that can win a national championship. There's not 24 teams. I think you would both agree with me on this. There's just no way. And so you're hard-pressed to find 16 teams. I think 16 teams can compete. Like, I think USC could have competed with Indiana this year. Granted, Indiana was on a very hot streak. But I think Vanderbilt could have competed with Georgia, whatever the seeding would have been. But Like Notre Dame being in the playoffs would have been a really good thing. Notre Dame was an incredibly good team that unfortunately got left out because of the way the structure is. But I think expansion's really harming the sport. The jump from 4 to 12 is already way too much. And now you have the weekly show, which does a lot of harm because now you have had Notre Dame fans specifically squealing and crying about how the committee's rigged and ESPN's rigged, this, that, and the third, and because they were in the playoffs the entire time. And so if you show your hand that early, it kind of harms you. We don't do this with college basketball. They just show, they have the AP rankings and then they have the show to determine the field of 68. They don't have this consistent show every week that's just there to garner TV ratings, garner drama, and all these other things. And the process of rule changing. We have a screwed up calendar. We have the transfer portal that's a disaster. We have NIL that's a disaster. We have high school recruiting that's a disaster. And yet the coaches think that changing the red shirt rule is one of the most important things in the sport. And I know coaches are only looking out for themselves. We have a lack of people that care about the sport of college football. That's just what it is. The CFP doesn't care about the sport. The conference commissioners don't care about the sport. The coaches, they somewhat care about the sport because otherwise they wouldn't have a job. But they don't really care about the long-term health of the sport. They're just trying to go win a national championship. So there is such a lack of people that actually care about the sport. There's so many people in media that don't care about the sport. And I think it's a really big problem because none of these people actually care about the long-term health. You can go throw out a problem. You can go say that the calendar is a problem, and you're on chapter 5 of what's wrong with the sport. I mean, we haven't even – this has been a 32-minute segment, and we haven't even peeled back all the layers yet. So I'm going to quickly get your two thoughts, and then we will move on. I'll start with you, Briggs.
I think you just about covered it. Yeah, I think the red shirt rule, them changing that, I don't want to say it shows us where their priorities are, but it's like you're throwing like a bucket of water onto a burning sky tower, like a burning skyscraper. Like it's not going to do anything to change much of anything other than like, hey, we can keep the high school recruit that we got for an extra year. When
like my point is like
when
give them an extra year eligibility. Just give them an extra year.
They're likely going to just transfer out anyway. Like the likelihood, I don't know what the stat is. I'm very curious to see if someone can put this together. What percentage of kids are staying with the school they actually got recruited by?
The turnover rate's close to 30 or 40%. It's somewhere in that range.
Well, I don't even think he's talking about that. I think he's talking about how many players, even if they transfer once, how many of them are actually staying with their school? You only really have seen that with the big schools now. It's like the Jeremiah Smiths of the world. Julian Sayin transferred out. He's the starter for Ohio State. Ty Simpson, he stayed at Alabama. Ryan Williams. I don't really know who else. I mean, I know a couple of the Ohio State guys, but I think that was his point. Quickly, I'll get your thoughts, Dylan, and then we'll move on.
In terms of like the whole CFP process, I'm going to go back to the start of the segment when you were talking about how expanding to 16 or 24 teams is crazy. I agree. I don't like a format where losses matter less, where it's almost like there's a redundancy with some of these games because you can go in, like look at Notre Dame this year. They lost their first 2 games, I believe it was, and still almost made it in because of how much more leeway there is. So expanding to 24 teams, you're going to have teams that lose 4 games that are going to make it in, which to me, or maybe not 4, definitely a lot of 9-3 teams that are going to make it in.
Iowa would have made it this year.
Yeah, you see,
Iowa was 8-4.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the thing. Teams like that, especially the bottom half of those 24, it's going to be a bloodbath. Like that's all it's going to be. And I think that keeping it at 12 is where we need to stay for now. And like you said, I think 12 might have been a little too much, but overall, I don't like college football where losses just don't matter. Like an 8-4 team should not have a chance to compete for a national championship.